Hello and welcome to the BA Sports Podcast. We are live recapping a little bit of Thursday night football. We had quite the scoring bonanza. Jamar Chase went off for a 50 burger. Joe Burrow went off for either a 30 or 40 burger, depending on what passing touchdown points are in your league. Lamar Jackson looked good. Chase Brown looked good. Mark Andrews looked good. Everything looked good for the offenses. The defenses, on the other hand, did not look good. Tanner, any thoughts on Thursday night football?
Joe Burrow was great once again. Jamar Chase, I mean,
Have a day, sir.
wow. 50 burger, jeez. We talked about how the Ravens were giving up chunk plays in the passing game pretty frequently, so I don't think that was a surprise. Chase Brown, I know he fumbled, but great back-to-back weeks once again. I know he had over 20 points again today. Um,
Against a tough defense, too.
Man, that was funny seeing Khalil Herbert just drop his first snap and get pulled from the game. I mean, I think immediately we knew, yeah, he's not going back in. And a divisional matchup like this.
Yeah, that was a fun matchup, fun Thursday night game in general. I mean, the Bengals probably should have gotten a penalty at the end, right there, but it is what it is. It's how the games end. Joe Burrow threw 56 times. My goodness, I didn't realize he threw for that many pass attempts, but that's crazy. But we're going to start going over some week 10 start, sit, sleepers, and busts. Uh, so let's get into the quarterbacks first. Then we're going to go into running backs, then wide receivers, then tight ends. Then we're going to go into kickers and defenses at the very end. So, kicking it off with the quarterback position, my start of the week at the quarterback position is going to be Brock Purdy. I think this matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is a prime matchup for him, coming off a bye, getting a weapon back in Christian McCaffrey. Also, Juwan Jennings looks to be back. Debo's going to be healthy. They still won't have Ayuk because he's done for the year, but I think this spot is perfect for Purdy. I mean, we saw Mahomes, who hasn't been a good fantasy quarterback this year, do well against this defense for the Buccaneers. They really can't stop anything through the air. They are a much better run defense. I think Brock Purdy's in a prime spot. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the quarterback position this week?
I really like Sam Darnold. He gets the Jags. He had 19 points last week. I'd start him this week against the Jags. They've had 7 quarterbacks with at least 18 fantasy points against them, including 2 that had at least 20 against them in just 9 games played for the Jaguars. And
Yeah,
I
he
also
has a good matchup. Justin Jefferson.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're
I
you're good. You
also
got it.
I also really like Jared Goff. He's been on the decline for 5 straight games, and he had less than 10 points last week. But that was a bad weather game in Green Bay. There was a lot of rain. But he scored 18 plus points in 3 of his last 5 games. And I think he has a good matchup against the Texans. Their defense allowed Aaron Rodgers to have 20.3 points against them. And overall, throughout the year, they've given up 16 plus fantasy points to 5 quarterbacks, including 3 with over 20.
Yep. I also do like Matthew Stafford again this week. Had him as a start last week. He paid off with like a 20-point game. I think he has a pretty good matchup this week. So you should fire Stafford up, especially with his weapons back. And Puka Nakua hopefully doesn't get ejected from the game as early as he did last week. Houston's just been allowing teams to just pass all over them. So I think that, or sorry, I was looking at Goff's. That's his matchup. Miami has allowed teams to pass all over them in recent weeks for the Monday night football game of the Rams versus Dolphins. So I think that Stafford has a fantastic matchup. Past 2 opposing quarterbacks have gone for over 26 fantasy points against them. So let's go into some guys we don't like at the quarterback position. Tanner, who do you have as a sit at the quarterback position?
Yeah, he was shit last week. He only had 3.1 fantasy points in a loss to the Vikings. And it's Joe Flacco, 39 years old, and he's definitely looked like it last week. He gets a bad matchup against the Bills, though. I mean, they've really only had a bad game against Lamar Jackson. They held C.J. Stroud, Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, and Tua to under 16 fantasy points. So I'd sit Joe Flacco if you can. You're most likely streaming him or maybe playing him in a 2 QB league, but there's probably better options out there for you in Week 10.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just don't see him doing well against the Bills. Another guy I don't really like is Bo Nix. He's going up against Kansas City at Arrowhead, so not a good environment for the rookie. The Chiefs have only allowed 3 quarterbacks to score more than 18.9 fantasy points. And I'm expecting Bo Nix to score probably under 20 fantasy points, maybe even under 15 fantasy points. He was only good for 17.7 fantasy points last week against the Ravens, who we just saw Joe Burrow tear apart. I don't think Bo Nix does well in this spot at Kansas City. It's going to be tough to pass the ball. Their defense with Spags calling the plays against the rookie, I just don't think it's going to go well for him. It's going to be hard for them to get the ground game going, and then I don't think they're going to be able to get the pass game going. You'll see in my weekly matchup analysis that I do not really like any Broncos this week to start. It is really bad spot for them. I think Kansas City's defense is just so good, and this matchup is going to be a defensive showdown between these two high-powered defenses. But sleepers that you may be able to stream instead of Joe Flacco. Tanner, who's a sleeper that you like in Week 10 that they can stream at the QB position?
I do have one more sit, if that's okay, and it's Caleb Williams.
Yeah, go for it.
Last 2 weeks, he's been shit. The Bears' offense has been a nightmare. He's dead last in the league among quarterbacks and on-target throws. And his completion percentage in his last 2 starts is an awful 47.7%. He gets my Patriots this week. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad matchup by any means. I just don't think you can really trust Caleb or the Bears offense right now. Or really anyone in that offense. I mean, maybe Swift, but as far as sleepers go,
maybe Swift, but
yeah, sorry. As far as sleepers go, I really like Kirk Cousins again. He's been hot lately. He's probably rostered in most leagues. I should probably check his percentage before saying this, but 7 touchdowns in his last 2 games. 46.4 fantasy points combined in those 2 games. He gets the Saints this week, or should I say the Aints. Their defense has allowed an average of more than 18 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 games. I think Drake London's going to play. He looked like he was at practice today. So I think Kirk Cousins is a good sleeper.
Yeah, and to note that defensive backfield, I mean, they've been without him over the past couple of weeks, but they're going to be without Marshawn Lattimore for the rest of the year because he's now a Washington Commander. So the Falcons don't have to worry about that guy on the defensive side of the ball for the New Orleans Saints. Another couple guys I do like as some sleepers. Tua Tagovailoa may have been dropped because of his performance. I think that he's in a good spot against this Rams defense who got absolutely torched by Geno Smith last week. I think that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle get on track. I'll talk about Jalen Waddle in the sleeper wide receiver section. Daniel Jones is another quarterback that I really like this week. He scored a season high going over 28 fantasy points last week, and the Panthers have allowed 2 of their last 3 quarterbacks to score at least 28 fantasy points. And Daniel Jones has played 4 games outside of New Jersey, and in all those games, he's been able to score a touchdown. I think last week was the first time in I can't remember how long that he's actually thrown a touchdown pass at MetLife Stadium. So he got back on track at home last week, but they're going to be going to Germany this week. And I don't think the Panthers are going to be able to stop this offense. I think Daniel Jones is going to get going. Malik Neighbors is going to get going. Tyrone Tracy's going to get going. I think the Giants beat the Panthers in this matchup this week in Germany. So I like Daniel Jones as a sleeper. And one more guy that could be out there, could maybe Justin Herbert. They've been passing the ball a lot lately. So I do like this matchup for him. And they're going away from the run. Maybe they don't want to run J.K. Dobbins in the ground. And Justin Herbert and his wide receiver core is kind of coming around together. So he just needs to get a few more passing touchdowns. He's getting a lot of yards, but not a lot of touchdowns. So hopefully we can see that if you want to throw in Justin Herbert as a sleeper as well. And any other sleepers, Tanner, for you at the quarterback position? Or should we move on to the busts?
Let's get right into the bus. Who do you have?
So, one sec, I lost it. Bust at the quarterback position is Patrick Mahomes. I know he's done well over the last couple of weeks. You drafted him early. You may not want to sit him. That is the bust section for a reason. If you can't sit these guys, don't sit them. But we're projecting them to have a down week this week. I just think Patrick Mahomes struggles against this Broncos defense. This Broncos defense has gotten a lot better this year, and they probably will stifle the pass game. I think they'll take away DeAndre Hopkins with Pat Surtain, and maybe Xavier Worthy gets going. He's the only guy that can resemble that Zay Flowers type receiver. But if they can't get him going, which he hasn't got going in really all year, it's going to be a tough one. I think they try and rely on the ground game in this one, short area targets. Kareem Hunt, I think, is going to have a pretty good game, but I don't see Patrick Mahomes having the game he had last week against Tampa Bay. They're not going to really have to chase points. This Broncos offense isn't as high powered as the Tampa Bay offense. Baker is a much better quarterback than Bo Nix, so I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to have to do as much. And that's just how the fantasy season's gone for him. But Tanner, who do you have as a bust at the quarterback position? You there, Tanner?
Yeah, just did I reconnect?
Yeah, I don't know. I can hear you again.
Okay. Good. I don't
Oh,
have any bus. I don't
you're
have any
good. You're
bus.
good.
You'll have just let's get into the running backs and just edit this part out because I don't have any bus for QB.
Okay. Starts at the running back position. I've got Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. I think, like I said, Daniel Jones is going to have a good game. Tracy's going to have a good game. Carolina is one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, and he's getting a lot of carries for this Giants team. He is now, I think, the lead back. Devin Singletary's essentially been phased out, and Carolina is allowing the most points to running backs. So I think that Tracy could easily go over 20 PPR fantasy points this week. I like him as a high-end RB2 with RB1 upside this week. Tanner, who do you have as a start for the running back position?
Yeah, I do like Tracy a lot. They're gonna be in Germany. Get him a bagel, get him a beer, and get him the damn ball. But for once, I like Aaron Jones. I mentioned their matchup against the Jaguars earlier. He hasn't been hot the last 2 weeks. He's had a combined 23.7 fantasy points while only averaging 3.1 yards per carry. But he's got a matchup against the Jaguars, and I just don't think you can afford to sit him in this matchup. Jags have been getting killed by opposing backs this year. 8 have scored more than 15 fantasy points, including 6 with more than 18 fantasy points, and 4 who have scored more than 21 fantasy points against the Jags. If you have Aaron Jones, I know he's disappointed you, but give him a shot against the Jags this week.
Yeah, prime matchup. Jags defense is not good at all. And let's move into some sits at the running back position. I've got, speaking of the Jags, Travis Etienne. I had Tank Bigsby last week. I don't think he should be even thinking of starting Travis Etienne, but if you are, because there are a couple of bye weeks this week, then I would not start him and sit him. It's just a bad matchup for him. I didn't like Tank Bigsby. I really don't like either of them in this matchup. The Vikings are one of the best teams in the league against the run, and they're number 6 in the fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. I think if the Jags are chasing points, Bigsby is going to be phased out for sure. That's what I talked about last week. It's going to be Dearness Johnson. I could see Travis Etienne getting work in the pass game, but they may not have Trevor Lawrence in this one, and I'm not loving that for this Jags offense in general. Like the only guy I would consider, or sorry, two guys I would consider starting are Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram out of this offense. But it's going to be a bad day to be a Jaguar, I think, come Sunday against this Vikings team who I think they're going to go into Duval County and destroy this Jags team. So definitely sit Travis Etienne. And Tanner, who do you have as a sit at the running back position?
I'm a little worried about Tony Pollard. Brady, you'll have to correct me on what the coaches were saying about maybe monitoring his snaps going forward in practice and during the games.
Yeah, I don't really know what they're talking about with that. I think it's Tajay Spears season.
It very well could be.
But
I know Chestnut
no,
was
no.
getting the reps recently. I know that when Pollard
Oh yeah, he's looked good.
was out.
He
But
looked good
if
last week.
Pollard plays, which I think he's going to, he has a tough matchup. The Chargers have allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. Only 2 running backs have gone for over 16 points against them this year. They held Javonte Williams, Nick Chubb, Chuba Hubbard, Najee Harris, all of those guys to under 14 PPR fantasy points.
Yeah, not a good spot for Pollard this week. I think let's go into some sleepers at the running back position. These guys, it's a slim week for the sleeper position just because we got a couple teams on bye. But I like Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. In deeper leagues, I would try and start him as like a flex, maybe an RB2 if you're in a super deep league. But he's kind of a boom bust player, and you're just hoping he hits on one of his big plays. Like last week, he caught a 63-yard touchdown, and I want to say also finished with around 17 PPR points. And then in week 7, he also did pretty good, scoring 11 PPR points. But in week 8, he dudded with like 2 or 3 PPR points. So I don't mind taking a risk at the flex. It's a boom bust flex for Ray Davis, but he's also a good stash in my opinion because if James Cook were to miss any time at the end of the season, Ray Davis would assume starting running back duty. So I do like Ray Davis as a stash or a sleeper this week. Another sleeper. This is a deep, deep sleeper, and you're just looking to stash him. Isaac Garendo. He's going to be the guy behind McCaffrey if Mason doesn't go, but if Mason plays, he'll be the third string running back. So just monitor Jordan Mason's status throughout the week. But that's a guy I'd just really want to stash. I don't really think I'd want to play him this week, but if you're in a slim like league with nothing available and you have to start him, then go for it. He could pop off. I don't see McCaffrey getting the full workload this week. I think they're going to ease him in. Tanner, what sleeper do you have at the running back position?
He's not a sleeper. I just want to touch on him because we were wrong about him last week, and that's J.K. Dobbins. He ran all over the Browns last week. He had 6 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. He gets the Titans this week, and then their last 2 games, they've allowed 2 running backs to go over 20 points. I know Ramondre Stevenson got a little fortunate on the last play of regular time, but I just wanted to bring him up to say, hey, hands up, we were wrong. J.K. Dobbins, and I like him this week.
Yeah.
If Brian Robinson Jr., I know he's been limited in practice, but if he plays, he has a good matchup against the Steelers. Kareem Hunt, he's still going to be.
If he doesn't play, I mean, you got to start Austin Eckler, I think.
Okay.
Just because that matchup is so good for Brian Robinson.
Kareem Hunt, keep him in your lineups at least until Pacheco returns. He's got a good matchup against the Broncos. And on the other side of the ball in Germany, Chuba Hubbard, he has a great matchup against the Giants.
Yeah, to note, they get Jonathan Brooks back first time all year. I think they're going to ease him in. They're going to have a couple plays designed for him, but I think it's the Chuba Hubbard show. As we saw, he just got a contract extension, so I don't think they're going to go away from him anytime soon. I mean, especially when your rookie's coming off an ACL injury, I think you're going to try and ease him in as best you can when you have one of the worst records in the entire league. Speaking of a guy I don't like this week, bust alert, Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys. The Philadelphia Eagles, they've been a lot better against running backs this year. They're number 4 in fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs, and they've allowed just 2 touchdowns to running backs. Also, Tanner, if I told you that Rico Dowdle has the most carries without a rushing touchdown this year for running backs, would you be surprised? Because that is a true statement. He's scored a lot, I think 3 receiving touchdowns to be exact, but he still doesn't have a rushing touchdown, which is shocking. Chase Brown's 11 PPR fantasy point performance is the best performance against the Eagles. So, yeah, Rico Dowdle, I am nervous for him this week.
Just going to another crazy stat in that Dallas run game. What if I told you that Ezekiel Elliott has not forced one single missed tackle this year, nor has he broke a single tackle the entire year?
Yeah, that's why he didn't play last week, and he may not be activated this week if he can't get his shit figured out. Like missing meetings and being late, it's bad. And I think Rico is still the lead back in this Dallas offense, but it's not that good of an offense. So I don't know if that's saying much. So he's on bust alert for sure.
And you touched on Garindo. I think Jordan Mason is a bust alert. His numbers have taken a massive fall on 4 straight games, while also he has a banged up shoulder. CMC's back, so Mason's touch shares obviously going to decrease, and his time as a fantasy starter is out the window. I think I've even saw him get dropped in a 14-man league of mine. So, and then just really quickly, without getting any notes on these guys, Bucky Irving, not a good matchup against the Niners. David Montgomery, really bad matchup against the Texans. Raheem Mostert, it's kind of the Devon Achane show out there in Miami. They have a bad matchup in Los Angeles against the Rams. And Javonte Williams, touched on him last week. Couldn't trust him after busting against the Panthers. And he has a really tough matchup against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are a really good defense against every position except for tight ends. They're the worst defense in the league against tight ends, but yeah, a couple more bust alerts at the running back position.
Yeah, Mostert fumbled last week, and I'm pretty sure I texted you, Tanner, and I was like, that's the last we'll see of him. And sure enough, we barely saw him on the field, and they started giving Jalen Wright carries, and it was the Devon Achane show after that. I'm pretty sure he had like a 70% plus snap percentage. Achane did after Mostert's fumble, and I think it's going to be the Devon Achane show once again. This Rams defense, I think. I think they're going to allow Devon Achane to catch the ball, but they've been pretty good against running backs. But you're starting Achane regardless. But let's move into the wide receivers because we got a decent amount of them. And let's move into the starts at the wide receiver position. I had Brian Thomas Jr. as a start at the beginning of the week, but we got news that Trevor Lawrence is most likely not going to go. So I think they're going to be rocking your boy Mac Jones at quarterback, Tanner.
Mm.
And I don't know if I feel comfortable with Mac Jones at quarterback and starting Brian Thomas Jr., but he's got one of the best matchups in the league. The Minnesota Vikings allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and they're number one in most fantasy points allowed to outside receivers, I believe. So I think I'm just going to start Brian Robinson Jr. as a flex for sure. But he's the guy I'm a little worried about with Mac Jones at the helm.
Nah, Mac Jones, benefit of the doubt, might be the best backup quarterback in the league. Maybe that's a reach, but I do like Brian Thomas Jr. this week as well as Jalen Waddle. I know he's been really bad.
Waddle.
Last week finished with negative receiving yards, though he did have a touchdown. One of only 3 receivers in NFL history to do that. He's got it with 4 teams on a bye this week, though. I mean, you might be forced to play him. I know I am in one of my leagues. He should be a valuable
Yeah,
flex
I am
option for
too.
me, though. He gets the Rams. Like I said, their defense has allowed the 4th most points per game to perimeter receivers. So Waddle and Tyreek Hill should bounce back this week.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna have a great game this week, and I had Waddle as one of my sleepers as well. So let me go into another start. Devontae Smith, I think easily should be in your lineup. That shouldn't even be a question. I know AJ Brown's coming back, but Smith has been great over the last 2 weeks. Another guy I like is Juwan Jennings. He's coming back. At least that's what they said today. We'll see if it's actually true, assuming all goes well leading up to the game. And then another start I like is Tank Dell. It's not looking like Nico Collins is going to be back this week unless something changes. And he's got one of the better matchups in the league against the Detroit Lions defense, who allows the third most fantasy points to opposing receivers. So I think if Dell plays without Nico, it should be the Tank Dell show, and I think he has a pretty good game. But let's move into some sits at the wide receiver position. Tanner, what do you have as far as sits go for the wide receivers?
Talked about him before. It's Maserati Marv. Again, hand up. I was wrong about the guy to this point in the season. He's, taking him in the second round or back end of the first round has not paid out for me to this point. He's proven to be a boomer bust receiver. He's just not lived up to his expectations. Look, Justin Jefferson had a bad quarterback his rookie year. Fuck. There's one other guy I can't think of right now. Anyways, Marvin's got a tough matchup against the Jets this week. He gets Sauce Gardner. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points
Mm-hmm.
per game to wideouts and the 4th fewest points per game to perimeter receivers. Marvin's had single digits in 4 of his last 5 games. I do not like Marvin Harrison Jr. this week.
Yeah, he's actually my bust of the week at the wide receiver position. Another guy who played against the Cardinals and Marvin Harrison Jr. last week that I have as a bust is DJ Moore. He's been really tough to trust. He like was half-assing a route. I don't know if you saw that video, Tanner,
Mm-hmm.
but Like the out route, he just slowly ran it. I mean, you're obviously not going to get open if you're going to half-ass that route and run it at 25% speed. Caleb Williams can't get you the ball. But this offense is in shambles. We were talking about it earlier. Like when you were talking about Caleb Williams, I'm not liking DJ Moore this week against New England. I think it's going to be the lockdown show of Christian Gonzalez once again. He's going to frustrate DJ Moore in this one. I'd rather start a guy like Keenan Allen or Romo Dunze who aren't going to be covered by Christian Gonzalez. It's a tough matchup for DJ Moore. And another sit at the wide receiver position. I don't like Calvin Ridley. His quarterback play has been awful. He has one of the better schedules, but this week is a bad matchup. The Chargers are number 6 in fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing receivers. And it's really just tough to trust Calvin Ridley at this point. Another sit is Xavier Worthy of the Chiefs. Like I said, he's pretty much a boom bust flex at this point. I'm actually not sure if he should be even rosterable at this point. DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce are the better receiving options in this offense. It's just hard to trust Xavier Worthy, who is another disappointing rookie alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. Tanner, any other sits or do you want to get into sleepers for wide receivers?
I was gonna touch on the other side of the ball in that Xavier Worthy game. Cortland Sutton, he's been great the last 2 weeks, scoring 15 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. But even last week, he threw a touchdown pass to Bo Nix. We talked about the Chiefs' defense being tough on every position outside of tight end. They are really tough on receivers. No defense in the league has allowed fewer fantasy points per game to perimeter receivers this season. And receivers who have lined up out wide have found the end zone just twice all year. It's going to be a tough divisional matchup. AFC West battle. I think Sutton is a risky play in a game that's at Arrowhead. Also, talked about Flacco a little bit earlier. Michael Pittman Jr., tough matchup against the Bills.
Yeah, tough to trust.
They've only allowed
Josh Downs has a good game in that.
Downs is his Flacco's guy for sure. Tough matchup against the Bills though, who have allowed just 6 touchdowns to opposing wideouts this year, and perimeter receivers have averaged the 5th fewest points per game against the Bills.
Yeah, definitely a tough matchup for the Colts, but I think Josh Downs, like, he is the guy that Flacco's going to look to, maybe in the short area, maybe a couple deep shots, but he's going to be peppered with targets. I believe he had 9 targets last week against Minnesota, so I think he's going to see 9 plus targets again in this one. They're going to be passing. I think they're going to be trailing. So Josh Downs, I like him way more than Pittman. I agree with you on that one, Tanner. I think you got to sit Pittman. It's just too tough to trust him. He's not seeing the targets Downs is seeing. A couple sleepers. I mean, they may be available. Quentin Johnston, he's come on. Now he's gotten a little lucky over some blown coverages. I do like Xavier Legette against the New York Giants. I think that game should be a decent one in Germany. And Jalen Waddle is another guy that you mentioned earlier, Tanner. He's got a good matchup, and I think he takes advantage of it in this one. They're number 10 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing receivers. I'm starting Jalen Waddle as a flex or wide receiver 3 this week. Can't really start him as a wide receiver 2, but if you're in a pinch because of the bye weeks, then I mean you have to start him. But let's move on to tight ends, Tanner. If you don't have any other things for wide receivers,
I do think Mooney good matchup against the Saints. And I actually do like DJ Moore against the Patriots. To be honest, I don't think Christian Gonzalez is going to be on him. I think Gonzalez is going to be on Keenan. And so for that reason, I actually would have Keenan as a as a bust. And then Quentin Johnson, I think we should mention as well. He's as a bust. He had a good game last week. He's hot ad on the waiver wire this week, but bad matchup against the Titans. And Demarcus Robinson,
Well,
another.
if
Go
they're
ahead.
without L'Jarius Sneed again, I mean the Titans have been a good matchup over the past couple weeks. I
Okay,
think.
definitely
Is that
something.
who
Yeah,
the
definitely
Chargers are
something
playing
to
with?
the Titans. Definitely something to
Yeah,
monitor going into
they may
Sunday.
not have Sneed or Diggs. Yeah, they may not
And
have
then
Sneed or Diggs.
Demarcus
So I
Robinson versus
think
the Dolphins. I know we talked about this in previous weeks, but just receivers matchups against the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey and Patrick Surtain and in Denver, just bad matchups, just matchups to avoid. Just those defenses
yeah,
in general.
let's move into the tight. Yeah, that's true. Let's move into the tight ends. Starting off with the starts, the Bills, Dalton Kincaid. I think he's got a great matchup this week, and I think he should just be inserted in your starting lineup. Which, I mean, at this point, I don't know why you'd be sitting him. I mean, I guess he hasn't been great every week, but he scored at least 11 PPR fantasy points in 2 of his last 4, so 50% of his last 4 games. And he had 10 targets last week, but only had 4 catches. So I think if those targets come this way or his way in this matchup, I think against Indianapolis, who aren't very good, they allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. I think he's got a good matchup and is primed for a big week this week. Tanner, who do you like at the tight end position?
Ooh, I've got 3 guys. I'm not sure how you want to categorize Taysom Hill. He could be sleeper, could be starter. But he was huge last
Sleep.
week. He had 16 fantasy points. He could see carries inside the 5-yard line, gets targets. Great matchup against the Falcons. They've given up
He
the
does it all.
8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends this season. I also really like TJ Hawkinson. He's back. I know he didn't have an impressive game last week. He scored just 5.7 points. Still, he only played 33 snaps, and he should only see his snaps and targets increase when the Vikings go to Duval County this weekend. Jags have been bad against tight ends. 5 have gone for over 11 or more points against them, including allowing 16 points to the position in the last 4 weeks. 16 or more, excuse me. So that's a great matchup to exploit. And then I want to call this a sleeper just because it's a bad matchup on paper. Jake Ferguson against the Eagles. The Eagles have not allowed a single touchdown to tight ends this year. So that's why I want to put him as a sleeper. But sometimes volume is much just more important than who you're going against. And with 4 teams on a bye,
Mm-hmm.
CeeDee Lamb, though he was just recently announced earlier tonight that he is expected to play. But with him being banged up, I think Ferguson's going to see a lot of targets in this game.
Yeah, I think Cooper
And who
Rush
knows?
leans
Cooper
on
Rush,
him,
yeah,
and
exactly.
he should easily lean on him this week. Also to note about Taysom Hill, Tanner, in the earlier matchup this year, he had 4 carries, or sorry, week 4, he had 6 carries for 24 yards and 2 touchdowns against this Falcons defense. I think he can score a rushing touchdown. I kind of want to put together an anytime touchdown score parlay with Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara scoring the 2 touchdowns for the New Orleans Saints. I don't know how much that'll pay out, but they probably are the only 2 guys I like in this offense at the moment. Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara. The Saints are just not great on the offensive side of the ball. Another tight end you may want to avoid actually is Zach Ertz of the Washington Commanders. I think he's got a tough matchup. I'm just not looking to play him. I think you can probably look for better tight ends out there. And a bust alert is Sam Laporta. I know he's already pretty much busted this year. He's only seen 26 targets on the year. He's only scored 2 touchdowns on the year, and Jameson Williams is back. So that just means the targets are going to be spread around for Jared Goff. And we all know he's not throwing many passes this season. So this is a very bad matchup as well. They're number 1 in fewest fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. So I just can't get behind Sam Laporta this week against this Texans defense in Houston. It's going to be tough. I really only like him in super deep leagues, but I would try to avoid Sam Laporta if you can. I actually started Mike Gesicki over him, and that didn't really pan out well because Tanner Hudson got in the end zone. But it is what it is. Sam Laporta, I think, should be on bust alert. Tanner, any other sits or busts for you at the tight end position?
Dalton Schultz, Dolphins gets the Lions, who haven't had a tight end beat them for more than 10.7 fantasy points this year. Schultz also just hasn't been able to exploit good matchups this year, to be honest. Cole Kmet against the Patriots.
You can't trust him.
I mentioned him last week. In games he hasn't scored 24 or more. He's had single digits in every single one. Matchup's not bad on paper against the Pats, but it's tough to start anyone in Chicago with any kind of confidence after what we've seen the last 2 weeks. And that's all I got for tight ends.
All right, well, let's move into kickers and defenses and round this thing out. Kickers. Let's go into kickers first. Start at the kicker position. I think that the Eagles are going to put up points on the Cowboys, so I'm going to go with Jake Elliott. I think he's going to have a good week. And yeah, I would fire him up. The Cowboys, I don't know if they've actually won a home game this year, but it's been bad, and I think that that the Eagles are going to score at will. It's going to be the Saquon Barkley show, the A.J. Brown show, Devontae Smith show. You name an Eagles player, they're having a show. Yeah, I also do like Chris Boswell. He's been really good in recent weeks. They did have a bye last week, but if he's out there, go pick him up. I think he's going to have a pretty good week against the Commanders. Tanner, who do you like at the kicker position?
I don't like Boswell. The Commanders at home this year have allowed the fewest points out of any team, and 3 of 4 have been held to a point or less out of their 4 games at home this season against opposing kickers. But as far as I do like, Dicker the kicker is coming off his worst game of the year. Only had 2 points last week. But the previous 3 before that, he had at least 9. Titans have allowed 4 kickers to score at least 10 points against them and 6 to score at least 8 points against them. So fire him up.
Yeah. To note on Boswell, he may not have a good matchup, but he scored 14 plus PPR points in the last 3 games. So, I think that the Steelers offense is going to outperform not only the Steelers offense, I think the Steelers defense can generate turnovers. This team should be able to get the ball in the red zone. Now, they may not be able to convert touchdowns, which is why I like Boswell. He also has hit a lot of long field goals this year, so I think that bodes well for him scoring more points. Some kickers I don't really like. Actually, well, did you say anything about Chad Ryland, Tanner?
Fuck that
another
guy.
Sleeper. I like. He is a pretty. I like that he's kicking inside against the Jets. I think he had a good week last week. I think if you're in a bind for kicker in a deeper league and have to find someone, go look out for Chad Ryland because he's probably out there. I think he's only owned in like less than 10% of leagues.
1.9% of ESPN leagues.
Geez, yeah, he's not owned in very many, so you should be able to find him. A guy that I don't like this week is Matt Gay. I think he's gonna bust. Another kicker I'm trying to sit this week just because I'm worried about the Jags offense is Cam Little. I don't really want to play him this week. But Tanner, do you have any sits or busts at the kicker position?
Shit, if we were recording before this Bengals game, Justin Tucker would have been a great shout. I just don't know what's going on with that guy this year.
Strictly extra points in that game.
I don't like
And he
Chase
shanked them.
McLaughlin's matchup. He's been held to an average of just 6.3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Gets the 49ers, who have held Harrison Butker, Brandon Aubrey, and Jason Myers to 6 or fewer points this year. So sit his ass, and that's all I got for kickers.
All right, let's move into defenses. I like the Chargers defense as a start this week. I think they've got a great matchup against whatever quarterback's throwing the ball, not really throwing the ball that well. They're good against the run. They're good against the pass. They stifled the Browns last week, forced Jameis to turn it over, I think, at least 3 times. I think they're going to be in a pretty good spot here. And if they're out there, pick them up. Another guy or another start at the defense position. The Eagles, the Cowboys are just bad. Their offense is bad. Mike McCarthy cannot call plays. The Eagles have allowed 17 points or less in each of their last, I believe, 4 games. So I don't know if the Cowboys are scoring more than 17 points without Dak. Banged up CD. It's going to be tough to get anything going because they haven't figured out how to run the ball, and I don't think they are this week. As I have Rico Dowdle as a bust, but Tanner, who do you like at the defense position as far as starts?
Vikings I like a lot. I have concerns about this. Excuse me, sorry. I have concerns about them traveling to Germany, but I also do like the Giants' defense against the Panthers. The Bears against the
Yeah,
Patriots.
they're my sleeper.
Falcons against the Saints.
Yeah.
But going
Mm-hmm.
back to the Vikings, though, they've got 11 points last week against the Colts, and I think they're gonna take that momentum and run with it. The Jags offense has committed 12 giveaways. Trevor Lawrence not expected to start. Minnesota ranks second in the league in takeaways. So Jags are prone to do it. Vikings are prone to take it away. And their defense is top 6 in sacks this year. So I do like the Vikings.
Yeah, something to note about the Giants, they're my sleeper of the week, and they have the second leading sack getter in Dexter Lawrence, and then Aziz Ajular, I can't even pronounce his name. Aziz Ojulari is number 13 in the league with 6 sacks. So they've got 2 guys. Brian Burns is also up there at tied for 17th. This front 7 for the Giants is going to generate pressure for Bryce Young, and I think it's going to hurt him unless they can get the run game going. But I like them as a big time sleeper this week. And then a bust is the Broncos defense. They were a bust last week. We called that. I'd be wary to start them against this Chiefs offense,
Negative
but
3
maybe they can
points.
stifle Mahomes. I don't know. I think it's gonna be tough to start them again. Uh, they're just not built right now as a top defense, but they're good in good matchups.
Don't drop them,
Whenever they
but
have
sit
tough
them.
matchups, I think they're gonna struggle. Yeah, sit them. Another defense that you probably shouldn't roster at this point because Marshawn Lattimore has moved on, and you should sit them this week. You should drop them. It's the New Orleans Saints. Uh, they didn't even get a win against Carolina. They allowed 23 points to that horrid offense. I don't know how they're going to stop the Falcons this week, but they're going to have to try. And maybe the coaching change makes something happen in New Orleans. I don't know, but the Saints are horrible, and I would definitely avoid them this week. Any other defenses you want to avoid, Tanner, or defenses that may be sleepers?
Pittsburgh, avoid them on the road at Washington. Texans
Tough.
at home against the Lions.
Oh yeah, they're my sit of the week. Definitely sit the Texans. Lions are
And
good.
that's all I got for defenses.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it then. That's all the start, sits, sleepers, and busts for week 10. The weekly matchup analysis with every single game, every single start, sit, sleeper, and bust is going to be out tomorrow instead of Saturday. I will try and get that going first thing in the morning. I think Tanner dropped off. I'm not sure what happened, but that's going to do it for our week 10 start, sit, sleepers, and busts. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. I really appreciate you all listening, and stay locked for week 10. We got teams on bye, so beware. I will post the teams on bye tomorrow in the weekly matchup analysis. But yeah, have a great weekend of football. Started off great with this Thursday night game. Let's continue it all the way to Sunday and Monday. Everyone, I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I'll catch you next week for NFL Week 11. Have a good one. Bye.